All right. Welcome, everyone. This is, I guess, the Nations of Sanity podcast. We're going to be having a debate between Matthew Sands and Walter Block on the topic of Israel and Palestine. Uh, if I had to guess, I would say that Walter is going to be representing Israel and Matthew is going to be representing Palestine. We're going to be having a debate for, I don't know, as long as it needs to be. We're going to start out, I guess, with Matthew giving a 5 minute or so introduction of his perspective. Then Walter's going to go. Then we're going to have an open floor for discussion for however we want to go, however long. And then we're going to close it with Matthew ending and then Walter finishing this off. I'm going to be moderating this. I'm basically going to let them speak for the most part, unless there's an issue where they're talking past each other or there needs to be some clarification on some terms. But over to you, Matthew. You're going to start.
Thank you, Noah. I really appreciate you moderating this debate. It's also for the Together Strong project, which is a project that's based on bringing people together to discuss and debate various elements so we can all kind of get to truth together. And thank you, Walter, as also for taking the time to do this debate. Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I'm not so sure it's Israel versus Palestine in this debate so much as more I disagree a lot with a lot of what arguments Walter has made in justification of what Israel have done. So I suppose I'm kind of on the Palestinian side in that regard. But obviously, this is a very nuanced issue where I don't think it's a good versus evil kind of situation. When we talk about Israel and Palestine, there's a lot of understandable arguments that Walter makes, but there's also a lot of arguments that I think he's very wrong on with regards to the justification. I don't think there is a libertarian argument for justifying pretty much any of Israel's actions. And not to say that they don't have obviously a right to respond to the things that they've been victims of, and they have been. And as I say, there's a lot of evil on both sides of this, as well as a lot of innocent people that have unfortunately lost their lives, again, on both sides of this. So I don't want to sort of wave away that aspect of it. But at the same time, Israel has been committing what I view as outright crimes and killing a lot of innocent people, which I don't feel is justifiable under, well, any terms, but certainly not under libertarian principles. I don't think I need the full 5 minutes for this introduction, because I do think that most of this will come out when Walter gives his arguments, and then I can kind of say why I think those arguments are incorrect, or why I think they fail from a libertarian point of view. But I'll just kind of sort of round out my kind of perspective on this by just sort of saying that as libertarians, and which we all three of us are, and we're all on the same page on most issues, and the reason why we're on the same page on most issues, and even the areas where we often disagree, there's often common ground to be found on those debates, because we all come from the same basic premise that we'll have right over ourselves as individuals. That's where our identity truly lies, where it's concerned with like our rights. It's not connected to our ethnicity, whether it's Jewish or any other kind of classification. It's not connected to when our ancestors were at a certain place thousands of years ago. Our property rights apply to us as individuals, and the property that we acquire rightfully through first use principles, which also transpires to things like creation and trade and stuff like that. So that's kind of like my perspective on this. But I think the debate will be fleshed out better once Walter's arguments come, and we do sort of counter arguments and explore these issues more, because there is a lot of nuance to it. And I think it's important to kind of explore the arguments on both sides of this debate.
Okay, let me continue. And I want to thank Matt and Noah for inviting me on this. And I certainly agree with Matt that the best way to get that proverbial 1/1,000,000th of an inch closer to the truth is not by canceling each other and not by yelling at each other, and by having a civil discourse. And I have no expectation that this will be other than a civil discourse. We will disagree, but I think we all start out from the same premises, libertarian premises, which I take to be the non-aggression principle. You can do anything you damn well please. Just keep your mitts off of other people unless you have their permission. And secondly, private property rights based on homesteading would be the determination of whether there's an initiation of aggression or not. And in my view, the Jews have been around, I don't know, 5,000, 6,000 years, something like that, and had homesteaded the land that's under contention. And the Muslims have been around for, I don't know, less than 2,000 years. I think something like 1,600 years. And therefore, if there's any question as to who was there first, and homesteading goes to the people who were there first, it goes in the Jewish direction. And secondly, Matt says that there's not good versus, it's not a matter of good versus evil. I think it most certainly is a matter of good versus evil. He also says there's evil on both sides. I agree with him halfway. Namely, I see plenty of evil on the Palestinian side, but none except for, accidents of war on the Israeli side. And I don't think that it's totally a matter of individuals. The groups also can have rights. For example, right now in the United States, there are 360 million people, and the place is pretty empty. If you take a plane from Boston to Los Angeles, east of Mississippi, you'll see some lights. West of Mississippi, apart from Denver and maybe Las Vegas, the place is empty. Well, how many Indians were there when the Europeans first came over in, I don't know, 17 or 1605 or whenever they came? Something like 3 to 5 million Indians. So if 360 million people can't fill up the United States, 4 million native people certainly can't. So people say, well, we should give all the land back to the Indians. Nonsense on a stick, because they couldn't possibly have homesteaded that massive land that is the United States. On the other hand, do they own nothing? Of course they own something. They own, I don't know, 10, 20 square miles in their southern place, and then a road up to their northern place of another 10, 20 square miles. And there are, I don't know, 200 or 300 different tribes. But the point is that they homesteaded that not individually, they homesteaded collectively. So while I'm a methodological individualist, I'm certainly not a political individualist in that sense, that I don't think that groups can also homestead stuff. And I think the Jews homesteaded that stuff and are the rightful owners of the contending areas. Now, genocide is evil. What's genocide? It's not killing many people. It's rather aiming at killing people, especially women and children. That's genocide. And Hamas is guilty of genocide on October 7th. They genocided, if I can use a verb there, 1,200 people and kidnapped another 250 people. And that was just a pogrom among many pogroms where the Palestinians just don't like Jews all that much, and every once in a while erupt and start mass killing. Now, it's true that many more Palestinians or Gazans have been killed, but not a one of them is due to genocide. Rather, it is collateral damage. Now, why is this so important? Well, because genocide is purposefully aiming at women and children, and collateral damage is not. And indeed, the Israelis do the exact opposite. Before they bomb a hospital or a mosque or a school, they send out leaflets saying, look, we're going to bomb this place and you better leave. Namely, they're trying to save women and children. So it's the exact opposite. Well, maybe not the exact opposite of genocide, but certainly different. Well, why in bloody blue blazes are the Jews, the Israelis bombing hospitals, for God's sakes? I mean, that sounds awful. Well, the reason is obvious, that to anyone who's been paying attention, that Hamas puts rocket launchers and missile launchers and drone launchers in hospitals and in residential areas and in mosques and in schools. And now the Jews have a choice. Well, since the hospitals are holy, we can't bomb a hospital. Well, let the Hamas people keep sending rockets to Israel. That's one choice, and that's pretty much suicide for Israel. The other choice is leaflets and tell them to leave. And then what Hamas does is it won't allow them to leave. And then you have massive deaths, but due to Hamas. Look, if Hamas didn't want to have any more deaths, and if the critics of Zionism, which is just the idea that the Jews have a right to a state, if these people are so worried about collateral damage, I have a solution. Let Hamas release all the prisoners, the abductees, and let them surrender, and then not one further collateral damage will occur. So I think that I halfway agree with Matt. Yes, he says there's evil on both sides. I say, yes, there is evil on one side, and that's the Palestinian side or the Hamas side or the Iranian Hezbollah Houthi side, and not on the Israeli side. Although every once in a while, you're engaged in a war of over a year now, there have been some accidents, conceivably, but apart from that, the evil is all on the Palestinian side.
Well, I mean, there's a few things there. I don't know what to tackle first, really. I mean, the thing is with I mean, just to sort of clarify with the evil on both sides thing. I mean, I find it hard to justify saying that it's like 100% evil on one side and not on the other. I know you sort of acknowledging what you call collateral damage, but I mean, there's been some pretty objective crimes perpetrated on the Israel side. But I mean, it's important to know, obviously, that although I wouldn't necessarily frame it as Palestine versus Israel, because I'm more kind of contesting like some of your arguments justifying Israel. But I suppose I am kind of saying that in defense of, the Palestinians I feel are, victims of these violations. But I'm certainly not saying I certainly wouldn't adopt it as a Hamas versus Israel kind of position. I certainly wouldn't take their side because I think they are pretty much 100% evil people. But the Palestinian people and a lot of the people that have been victims of this whole thing are not evil people. They're innocent people. There's women and children and although many of them, I know there is a lot of prejudice towards Jews amongst the Palestinians, although I have seen a lot of prejudice amongst Israeli Jews towards Arabs and Palestinians as well. And there's lots of reasons for that. But the problem with this kind of collective guilt that gets applied, and this kind of attaches on to the other thing you mentioned with regards to sort of like, the Jews were here first, or like, we can have like collective ownership. It's like, well, you can have collective ownership, but it's still a collection of individuals. It's not like if I was Jewish and because a bunch of Jews once homesteaded a place that way past in the history disconnected from me, I can say, well, I have some kind of right to that place because I'm Jewish. You know what I mean? Like when we talk about collective ownership, we're not just saying Jews own that, so Jews have a right to it. We're saying if like a group of people got together to own something, then that group of people are the ones who own it, not people that share their ethnic identity thousands of years later. So although I do agree with you that collective ownership is perfectly valid, not when you're talking about kind of racial groupings. I'm talking about when you're talking about it's valid when you're talking about groups of individuals, because at the end of the day, if a single person can own something, then a group of us can own something. But it's still only valid because of the individuals that make up that group, not other people that are disconnected outside of some kind of shared ethnic heritage. So I don't really understand how you can, I mean, that's a very good example of where I really don't see the libertarian argument for that, because property rights, first use is surely the individual first use. It's not what, as I say, race, ethnicity, religion, or whatever else you want to kind of use as a kind of group identity. It's not which one who meets that group was first in that area. And also the other thing you mentioned about the Native Americans with regards to, like, they didn't homestead America, and you're right, they didn't. And when we point to aggressions as libertarians, when we point to aggressions that the Native Americans were victims of in the past, we're not pointing to the simple fact that Europeans went over there. It's not like we didn't violate them then. We violated them if we attacked them. And there were times when they attacked again, that's another example. There was evil on both sides. The Native Americans weren't peace-loving saints before Europeans went over there, but they were unquestionably the victims of many aggressions, and that was when their property rights were being directly violated through direct attacks, not through and I know I'm not an expert on history, but I know enough about it to know that there were times when there were settlers that lived in relative peace, within close region to Native Americans and stuff. So it's not a case of that land was theirs. And this is one of the things where kind of land ownership can get a bit arbitrary when claims are made over vast regions and entire countries and stuff like that. Of course, the Native Americans did not homestead the entirety of America, but they did still have property rights, certainly within themselves as individuals, certainly with wherever they settled. I know a lot of them would move around. Very few of them kind of stayed in one area, but each time they did settle in an area, they kind of temporarily homesteaded, like you do when you set up camp somewhere. That's, your tent is still your property, the same as your house is. You just might, unlike your house, you don't, that you can't just dig up and move somewhere else and abandon that area. You can with a tent, and then that tent returns to being a natural state that somebody else could pitch a tent in and stuff like that. So because the Native Americans existed like that, there's certainly plenty of examples of people from Europe and other places going there and not violating the Native Americans' rights in any kind of way or aggressing them. So and also, I feel like your kind of argument for the Jews were here first, surely that argument would sort of support a Native American who wanted to kick you out of your home and say, well, my people were here first in America. You know what I mean? So, and again, as libertarians, we know that's a nonsense argument, because you as an individual didn't violate anyone's property rights. And even if the Jews you refer to in the ancient past, even if they were illegitimately removed from that area, say like, through violence or whatever. I mean, most of history, unfortunately, regions have been acquired through violence, but we can't do anything about that. All we can do is operate as individuals within property rights and the concept of the non-aggression principle and individual self-ownership. And those principles, for me, make it pretty clear where we should stand on certain issues. And those principles, in my mind, throw out arguments about the Jews were here however many thousand years ago. They throw out arguments about this kind of collective association of, this group of people and this group of people. And I also think it doesn't mean we can wave away all the innocent people as collateral damage, when there is still a certain responsibility to not harm innocent people, even if you have a right of retaliation against the actual criminals. There are plenty of actual criminals. There's plenty of people that Israel have every right to kill. But there's a lot of people that they've killed that I don't feel they had the right to kill. And I understand that war is messy, but I think there's a lot of things here that just are not justifiable. So sorry, I know I've given you quite a lot of different arguments there, Will, to say tackle them as you will, but I'm very interested to really hear what you've got to say about this first use with regards to individuals versus group, because I just don't see how you can justify the Jews were here first as a kind of thing. And how would that not be the same with a Native American wanting to kick you out of your home because it's on his land, so to speak,
Well, I think it's very different. I think you're, I won't say contradicting yourself, but you're taking different views at different times. The point that I was making with regard to the Native Americans was they couldn't have possibly been there first for the whole country. because there were too few of them. Now, there were, apart from the fact that they were nomads a little bit, and they were in the south during the winter and the north, but they might not have been in the exact same place. Well, then their ownership of that land is even less secure. So let's make the best case for them. Let's say they always went from, I don't know, New Mexico up to Montana, and they came in the same places. And I would say, well, you know, they have, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 5% of the land. And therefore, I don't have to give them my house because they had too little land to preclude other people from legitimately owning stuff. Now, let's take the case of slavery in the American South. What should have happened in 1865 when the war between the states was over, we should have declared ex post facto that slavery is evil and that the punishment for slave owning is to become a slave. Namely, the white slave owners should have been enslaved by their black ex-slaves. That would have been justice in the way I see it. And as you know, slaves can't own property, and therefore all the plantation should go to the black ex-slaves. Now, forget about whether the overseers and the white slave owners should be enslaved, but clearly, if there were 100 slaves on the plantation, they should own each of them 1/100th of that plantation. And let's say it's, I don't know, 10 acres or something like that. Well, this is 1865. And now there's some black guy in Harlem, which is a black area in New York City. And he comes to the Libertarian court and he says, hey, look, there's this white guy. He's the great-great-great-grandson of the slave owner, and he's in South Carolina. And I don't think he's the rightful owner. I think I'm the rightful owner because I assume that my great-great-grandfather would have given that 10 acres that he should have been given in 1865, and he wasn't, but he should have been given it. He would have given it to his son, who was my great-grandfather, and he would have given it to his son, who was my grandfather, and he would have given it to his son, who was my father, and my father would have given it to me. My father gave me everything else. Why shouldn't he give me that? I'm the rightful owner of that land. Well, I think as libertarians, we have to say, hey, yeah, he's got a point. Not that the white great-grandson is a criminal, but he is occupying stolen land because in justice, that land should have gone to the black person. Well, why is this? Because they were there first, namely in 1865, they should have been given that land. So when you reject the idea, well, since the Jews were there first, they have some sort of ownership. Well, I'm assuming the Romans kicked them out, but that was unjust. And then I'm assuming that that the Jews own that land, even though the Romans kicked them out. And I'm assuming the blacks own that plantation, even though they were never given that plantation. So you can't have it both ways. If you agree with me on the slavery, and I notice from your head motions that you're amenable to this idea of reparations to blacks, not that all whites owe all blacks anything, nor that no whites own any blacks anything. That would be two extreme views. We're moderates here. We're libertarians, and we think that the burden of proof is on the person who wants to overturn property rights. And if this guy in Harlem can prove that his grandfather was on that great-grandfather was on that plantation, he should be given that land. So if you agree with that and you're shaking your head, yes, you do agree, well, then you have to agree with me to change your mind on the view that since the Jews were there first, they're the proper owners. Now, the second point you make is you shouldn't be killing innocent people no matter what. And I'm going to pull this on you. I am now Hamas, and I have a knife, and you are Israel, Matt, and you have a gun, and you're more powerful than me. I think we can agree that the Israelis are more powerful than the Hamasians or the Hamas group. And what I'm going to do is I've got my two children. These are my children. They're 2 and 3 years old, and I strap them to my body. and I'm coming at you with a knife. Where's my knife? Here's my knife. It's a pen, so don't worry. I'm not going to stab you, but I'm coming at you. Why am I coming at you? Because Matt, you're evil. I hate you. You're monstrous, whatever. And by the way, the only way you can stop me is by shooting me. But my children cover my whole body. Let's stipulate, even though they're smaller, you have to work with me on this case. And you have two choices. One, you can let me kill you. And by the way, not only am I going to kill you with my gun here, sorry, with my knife, I'm going to kill your wife and your kids and your sister and your brother and your parents. I'm going to kill the whole lot of you because you're an abomination. And now you have a choice. You can let me kill you. That would be suicide because you're more powerful. You have a gun. Or you can shoot me. But if you shoot me, you're shooting innocent people. Well, I think you have a right to shoot innocent people. Now, they're collateral damage. They're totally innocent. They're aged 2 and 4. What do they know from anything? They're just babies. They're in diapers. But you dirty rat, you killed them. I'm being silly about calling you a dirty rat. I don't mean that. But the point that I'm trying to make is that Israel is justified in killing, in stopping the rockets from coming over to Israel. And the rockets are being launched from hospitals and mosques and residential areas and schools. And the Hamas won't let the Palestinians out of those places after the Jews say, look, we're going to bomb this place. Well, I think you have to change your mind. You have to acknowledge that upon occasion, it is legitimate to kill innocent people. These children of mine are collateral damage. Now, it's unfortunate that there's so many deaths, but what is Israel supposed to do? Are they supposed to commit suicide? I can't believe that you would favor suicide for Israel, and yet the only way to stop them is to shoot my children. So that would be my answer to your point. One on the property rights, on the other about collateral damage. I think it's wrong to say that the libertarian view is you should never be able to kill innocent people. You should be able to kill innocent people in self-defense. And this case of mine here is one of self-defense. The only way you can stay alive is by shooting me. And the only way to shoot me is to shoot right through these 2 babies of mine. And I think you have every right to do it. And whose fault is it that these babies die? Whose fault is it that the Gazans are being killed? It's Hamas's fault. It's not Israel's fault.
Okay, yeah. I mean, just to go to the property rights thing first, the example you gave with the slave, the descendant of the slave owner and the descendant of the slave, and yeah, I mean, I was nodding along to the whole idea of basically saying that once we abolish slavery, we could basically say that this property that slaver was enslaved to perhaps build, at least maintain and work on, and all the rest of it, his recompense of being ownership over that plantation, over that property, is valid, and the slave owner doesn't have a right to it because he didn't acquire it through the libertarian way. So I was happy to nod along with you on that, and I was even happy to nod along with the kind of presumption of saying, well, okay, well, let's pass this down to the generations and say, well, he's the rightful inheritor of what his great grandfather should have been given, and as such, I'm happy. But we're dealing with individuals still. I understand that you're talking about like descendants and stuff like that, but we're talking about, I mean, even in your example, you said, if he can draw a direct line and say it was my daddy's daddy or whatever, you know what I mean, and also we're dealing with actual property. We're not just dealing with kind of just land, because that's the thing about the example with the tent versus the house. We tend to think of houses obviously as more permanent because we can't so easily move them around, but really our kind of dominion over the land is dependent of our actual property and our use that we're applying to it. And when we do that with like a tent that's more mobile, where we don't leave anything tangible and we just move on to another place, we don't have any dominion over that land anymore, unless it obviously was within our property, you know what I mean? But assuming we went out into the woods or something and we pitched up a tent, we've got a certain property right over obviously the tent, but also the kind of land that's being occupied by that tent during that time. But then we leave, somebody else could pitch up their tent in the exact same place that we were the week before. We don't get to come back 5 months later and say, 6 months ago we were here rightfully. You know what I mean? Even if, let's say, the reason we left isn't because we voluntarily left, but because someone kicked us off of that place. You know what I mean? Because it's like, unless the other person who we're now trying to kick off ourselves is directly connected to the people that kicked us off, we don't have any kind of. So that's where I feel like that example breaks down, because my objection to your argument on that front, on the property rights front, is that you're applying these kind of like racial groupings and things like that don't apply to libertarian principles. But the example you gave with the descendant of the slave versus the descendant of the slave owner, then that was dealing with actual individuals who had a property right claim based on them as individuals. It wasn't just some random black guy going up to some random white guy. And this is where kind of reparation arguments fall apart today when people are talking about things like that, because they say about, we should give black people whatever or something like that. And that's a nonsense thing, because, some of those black people may have been the descendants of slavers for all we know, you know what I mean? So we can't just, but that's my point as to why we can't just tie that to an ethnic group. We can't just say, well, the Jews were here first, because it's okay. But even if we fully accepted the idea that thousands of years ago, there were Jews that were rightfully there, and then they were illegitimately, removed through force by the Romans or whoever else, and then, a whole bunch of history has happened since then, that doesn't mean that however many decades ago, some Palestinian family who have what we would normally consider perfectly valid property rights to their home, get their home bulldozed in and have some settlers coming in citing the argument that you seem to be giving of, well, the Jews were here first, this is our land and all the rest of it, because that's not based on the individual property rights and the inheritance that you used in the slavery example. That's just an appeal to ethnic group identities, which don't have any basis in libertarian principles. So that's my kind of argument on the property rights front, and obviously want to hear what you got to say about that. With the collateral damage thing, again, I don't think your argument is exactly comparable, because when these buildings are being destroyed, and I mean, perhaps you could take by case, but when these buildings are being destroyed, it's not a case of, because in the example you gave, it's like you're coming at me. Basically, the only way I can stop you from killing me is to kill you. That's not the case with Israel. It's not the case that the only way they can stop themselves from being killed is to level all of these places and destroy all of these areas and kill all these people, because they, apart from the fact that they've obviously got a lot of defenses against a lot of what Hamas fires at them anyway, with the Iron Dome and stuff like that, it's a case of you're not in that kind. But also, I mean, so I don't think it's ineligible. I don't think you've got that kind of same degree of they've got no other choice. It's either suicide or kill all these people. I don't think that argument washes in most of the examples that you could cite. Maybe you could come up with one or two where it's literally been a case of that, but most of the instances I'm aware of don't meet that criteria. So that's one issue I kind of have with that side of the argument. There is that kind of, but also the other thing as well is, like, libertarians don't accept that killing innocent people is okay. It's just where the culpability for killing of those innocent people is, where does that lie? It's not okay for, say, go to the example that you did give of you coming at me with your children as your human shield, and there's no way I can stop you without killing you in a way that would also kill your children, like shooting you or whatever. In that situation, it's still not okay. I'm not saying you're saying this, I'm not trying to straw man you here, but I'm just to clarify my own position. It's not that it's okay to kill those innocent people, it's that the what's the word, the mens rea, the criminal culpability falls mostly on you, the embodiment of Hamas in this example, coming at me. So that it's more about where the culpability is. But my point is yes, I would agree that in the scenario where you representing Hamas have your children completely strapped to you and you're coming at me, and the only way I can save my own life is to stop you in a way that would also kill your children, then I would say yes. If not all of the blame, then like 99.9% of the blame is on you. But the fact of the matter is that exact example doesn't transpose to what's going on with Israel and Hamas. You know, it's like they didn't need to bomb Palestine to prevent October 7th, for example. You know what I mean? It's like, I know a lot of people have spoken about the various, you know, and this is not to, you know, obviously what happened was evil and disgusting, and I'm certainly not in the camp of people that would ever try to defend it in any way, not even by talking about the things that Israel have done to justify the hatred or whatever. But the fact of the matter is there's also the argument of how was that allowed to happen from a point of view of Israel defending themselves. They had every right to use full force against those people, but the problem is for whatever reason, because they weren't able to prevent that, their response has to be directed at the people that are actually guilty of those crimes, not just everybody that's within a kind of low, you know, a rough area. And to use a more accurate, what I think at least more accurately represents the kind of example is, rather than you coming at me with, you know, a full body full of human children as your shield and all the rest of it, it's more a case of you doing some horrific act to me that totally justifies me killing you, you know, no question about that. You know, we're in agreement that Hamas deserve to die. But, you know, we're fully in agreement with that. But then you go hide out in some building. It doesn't give me the right to blow up that building and kill all the innocent people to kill you, just because I have the right to kill you. So that's the kind of element of it. And although there are times when Hamas certainly aren't above, you know, obviously putting innocent people in their way as a kind of shield for them, it's very rare that it meets the kind of analogy that you gave, where there's no other way. And outside of those situations when there is literally no other way, I don't think Israel can escape culpability. And then even in those situations, it's still wrong, but just most, if not all, of the criminal culpability would be with Hamas in a truly analogous situation. But like I say, I think most of them are more like the example I gave, where you commit a crime, hide off in a building. And I got attacked by a gang of criminals, and they went to the next town. I know they live in the next town over. If I have the right to go and kill them, let's just say for argument's sake, that's all well and good. But I don't have the right to kill them in a way that, like say, even if I targeted their house and it just killed their immediate family, that's still innocent people that I did not have the right to kill. And I can't use that level of duress that you described in the immediate, there needs to be that immediate for the culpability to come, drain out of you and go to the other person fully. That's not to say that in the other scenarios, Hamas aren't somewhat guilty, even of all the other collateral damage that I'm saying doesn't meet your criteria. I'm not saying Hamas have got clean hands on that. They haven't. I do fully accept, I don't say your arguments without validity to talking about their culpability, but I do think it loses validity when you try to wash away all responsibility to Israel and say, well, Hamas started this, so it's all on them, no matter what Israel does. Because I think, well, no, we still need to pull it back to, it has to meet a true analogy to what you're talking about for that argument to work. And as soon as you step out of that, then I think it falls down. So sorry, I know we're kind of hitting two areas because we're doing the property rights thing and we're dealing the collateral damage thing. So we're kind of juggling two different lines of the debate, but obviously I'd like to get your view on both.
Could I just jump in real quick? So
Sure.
I think to kind of clarify, maybe creating like two different hypotheticals that might be a little bit more accurate or a little bit more thought-provoking than having this kind of like just proposing different like one-sided hypotheticals. I think when it comes to the property issue, an interesting thing to kind of analyze is just a situation in which, say, someone builds a house, it's a one-story house, that gets taken from them in some way, it's stolen. They kind of go away. The new proprietor, let's say it's not necessarily the person that stole it, but someone else comes in to that home and builds a second story on top of it. Now, that's a situation that's a little bit more akin to the Israel situation, I guess you could say, where there's historical sites that are definitely, Israeli, without a doubt. But then there's other areas where it's essentially been built on top of by other, ethnic groups or whatever. I think that is a little bit more akin to the Israel situation in regard to the property rights. Now, when it comes to the issue of, I guess you could say like the human shield versus human sword kind of situation, I think in Israel, especially right now because of the hostage taking, there's a different situation where instead of it being, like Walter said, where he's kind of coming at you with a knife and he has his kids in front of him, it's a little bit different than that. It's more or less that, let's say, someone from Hamas, they have their kids in front of them and they have they have a knife pointed at your kids with their kids in front of you, and you can stop them from killing your kids, which would be almost the representation of the hostage. I think that's a little bit more fair of an analogy where you're not dealing with this, well, it's purely retaliation or it's purely defense. It's a little bit different than that, where it's like, if you get what I'm saying, it's a situation in which there's going to be some collateral damage, I guess you can say, because of the nature of the hostages taken on both sides by uh one of the parties. So I think that's something that you might want to address there. But otherwise, it's been pretty good.
Well, Noah, I think that you exceeded your remit. I think one of the reasons Donald didn't want to debate Kamala a second time is because the moderators kept fact checking him and supporting her. And here you're sort of supporting Matt. So it's sort of like 2-1 against me. And I think Matt is quite capable of upholding his side of it without your help. So I think that you should limit yourself to just making sure that I don't take too much time or he doesn't take too much time instead of getting in with substantive issues. But since you did, let me respond to that. I want to get back to a point that Matt made that I thought was excellent. And what he said is not any random black guy can come up and grab this property. There's got to be some sort of burden of proof or something. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm now putting words in Matt's mouth. It doesn't have to be airtight because it's what 150 years ago or 180 years ago. I'm bad at math. So you can't expect something like yesterday. Matt and I had a contract, and it's been written down, and it's in black and white. But there's got to be something. And now we get into a continuum issue. Well, how much? What's the continuum issue? We know that if you go to bed with a 5-year-old girl, you're a statutory rapist, even if she agrees, because we don't think she's capable of agreeing to any such thing. On the other hand, you go to bed with a 25-year-old woman and she agrees, whatever you are, you're not a statutory rapist. Well, where do you draw the line? 16, 18, 17, 19? You can't deduce 18 years and 6 months from libertarian theory. It's a gray area. Well, it's also a gray area as to how much proof does the black guy have to show. If he shows in the Bible this, that, what the heck? If I were the judge, I'd say, okay, you get the land. And the same thing with the Jews. Here it's 2,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago, so you would accept even less definitive proof. Now, I'm glad that, Noah, that you mentioned building on top, because that's one of the bits of evidence. For example, the Second Temple is built underneath the mosque. Well, if the Second Temple is built underneath the mosque, you know that it was there first. And then the mosque came And, if somebody is kicked out, you see, now we have another continuum problem. Well, how many years do you have to abandon your property, even though the abandonment wasn't, voluntary? You were kicked out by the Romans. Well, we don't have any definitive amount. But I would say that if there's a contention between people who were there 5,000 years ago and people who were there 1,500 years ago, you have to give the nod in this imperfect world to the people who were there first. And not only is there the Second Temple and the mosque on top of it, but there's all sorts of archaeological evidence that the Jews were there first, that they had houses there, and they were kicked out. Look, can we tell this black guy in Harlem, well, sorry, too much time has evaporated. It's been 170 years or whatever it is, and you can't have the property? No, I think we have to give him that property. Well, then I think that we have to give the property to the Jews. Okay, the next point I wanted to make, and I'm glad we're doing both because both are really on the table, both being who owns the property and collateral damage. Now here, I agree with Matt. I'm trying to convert him to my way of thinking. He's now converted me to his way of thinking. I reject my own use of the word okay. I think Matt made a good point. It wasn't okay. It was horrible. What I should have said, but when you're speaking extemporaneously, you're not as exact as if you're writing or you can think about it. I shouldn't have said it was okay to kill the collateral damage. What I should have said is, look, for libertarians, it's either legitimate or illegitimate. And I would say it's legitimate and not okay. It's greatly regrettable. It's horrible that so many people are dying. Not all of them innocent, because, after October 7th, on October 8th, the Gazans were dancing in the streets, giving their kids candy in celebration of what Hamas did. And many, many other pogroms have occurred before the state of Israel. Matt was saying that the prejudice goes both ways. No, prejudice doesn't go both ways. It's virtually all started by the Palestinians, by the Arabs. They hate the Jews with a purple passion, not just because of Israel, because before 1948, when Israel was established, there were pogroms all over the place. And yes, the Jewish settlers are fighting back, but the Palestinians started it. And if there's a fight, you have to ask, well, who's at fault? And I don't think the Jews are at fault at all. And I disagree with Matt when he says 99.9% of the problem when he shot me and my children was me. Well, where do we get that 1/10%? I don't understand why Matt, who is now Israel, bears 1/10% of the deaths of my children. I bear 100% of it in my view. Now, we get another continuum problem, and Matt makes the point. Well, suppose that Yahya Sinwar runs away to a village, and the village has got a whole bunch of innocent people. And the only way we can kill him is by blowing up the whole village of 10,000 people. Should we do that? No, because he can't be he can't hold 100. He cannot by himself hold hostages of 10,000 people. Just impossible. However, Hamas has got, I don't know how many fighters, 100,000, 150,000, something like that. Can 150,000 be responsible for how many Palestinians are there? 2.5 million, something like that? Yes. So again, you have a continuum. How many people can you hold as a shield before it's not really a shield, and now it's improper to bomb the whole place to get the one bad guy? Well, in the case of Yahya Sinwar in 10,000 people, no, we shouldn't bomb him and kill 10,000 innocent people. Fine. But collateral damage, and here Matt says, well, my argument is correct, but the analogy doesn't fit. If I could put words in his mouth summarizing what he's saying, well, I think the analogy does fit, because the issue turns around how many marauders, how many evil people, how many people like me who use my children as a shield does it take to capture innocent people. And one person can't capture 10,000 people, but 150,000 fighters can capture 2 million people. I think that's well within the realm of reason. So I accept Matt's criticism of me. I shouldn't have used the word okay. I should have said regrettable or horrible, but legitimate. Because, and I think that there is a good analogy. And when he starts stretching things, it's sort of like saying, well, you shouldn't be able to go to bed with a 25-year-old woman under statutory rape age. You should. And you should be able to use collateral damage at a hospital or a mosque, because that's where they put people. And then what Israel does is they say, look, we're going to set up this area. It's a safe area. All you Palestinians go there. And guess what? Hamas follows them, and it starts shooting rockets into Israel. And Hezbollah does the same thing, and the Houthis do the same thing. And Iran is using these people as proxies. Look, let's take the Hezbollah situation. The UN has been there, supposedly a buffer between the two places. Meanwhile, Hezbollah has been shooting rockets in support of Hamas for over a year, ever since October 8th. And Israel starts shooting back. Well, but they're innocent people south of the Litani River, because Hezbollah also embeds itself among innocent people, and they have plenty of people to do it, so that the analogy holds. And I think what Matt is saying, in effect, is that Israel has to commit suicide. And suicide libertarian is not a suicide pact. So I think that libertarians are entirely justified in doing that. By the way, I'm now finished, but it's almost an hour, and I have to get out of here after an hour. So what I suggest is, Matt, you take another 5 minutes or so, and then I'll respond, and that'll be it.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's your turn now.
Okay, yeah, no problem. Okay, well, I mean, just to be fair to Noah, because I don't think he was trying to take sides. I think he was just trying to reframe so in a way that would help our debate. But one of the things he did bring up, which I actually think was, if anything, on your side a little bit, or at least helping you out a bit, was to point out that some of the property right claims are for actual property. Because obviously, one of my points was that, you know, this isn't even property we're talking about. We're just talking about land. We're talking about areas that, you know, don't have the same property on them that you are saying, you know, was once rightfully owned by Jewish people. And that was my point. So I do think that's a valid point that, you know, that Noah injected into the conversation, which kind of helps your side a little bit, because it gives me something else to contend with. Because although I still think my argument stands perfectly valid when I'm talking about just land where Palestinians have built a home, and then, you know, some Jewish occupiers have come in with bulldozers, and that for me is, and I'd like to get your opinion on a specific example like that. I'm not saying that justifies anything Hamas does or anything like that, but whether you do agree that those sort of instances at least are NAP violations by the Israelis in those specific examples. But then there is also the contention of, okay, well, what about when there is actual property, like you say, the temple that's built on top of the temple, that's built on top of the temple. Now, then it is a difference. So I do think that's worth segregating those two things. Like I say, I'm keen to get your idea on the whole idea of, you know, when it's just land and it's, you know, and the Palestinians built his house that gets bulldozed over, versus the situation where you've got, like, you know, a mosque built on top of a Jewish temple, or, you know, or whatever. In those situations, first of all, the property rights claim still needs to be justified on an individual basis. Like, going back to the example you gave with the slave owner, and I know I'm going to try and be brief on this because I know we've got to wrap it up. But just going back to your example with the slave owner and that, you know, you're only able to justify that by saying because he was the descendant of the descendant of the descendant. I think you agreed, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you agreed that if he was just a black guy, he wouldn't have any claim, no claim at all, like no more than me, the white guy. You know what I mean? So, and that's my point about this whole Jewish claim over even the property is, where's that come from? Unless that can actually be, you know, identified through the individuals, even if it's, you know, descendants of descendants and descendants. My point is this kind of, you know, racial group identities have no place in libertarian philosophy. You know, people are allowed to think that in those kind of terms, just as we're allowed to group identify any which way we want. But the only thing that matters from a libertarian principle point of view is the individuals and the property that they build. So those are the kind of two things that I'll sort of thing out. And then just going to the kind of collateral damage thing. I mean, you know, there's instances where what about when it's Israeli hostages? What if about when they're bombing an area that's likely to have Israeli hostages? Should that make a difference? Now, I don't think it should, because innocent people is innocent people. But I'd be interested to understand from your point of view whether you think that the kind of duty of care that Israel has is any different in those circumstances, whether it's an area that, say, Hamas, perhaps with some, you know, collateral damage of innocent Palestinians, versus Hamas in an area where you've got reliable information that they've got Israeli hostages who, you know, obviously certainly a priority for what Israel is doing is not just vengeance, but it's also to try and get those hostages back, to try to kill Hamas and put them into a position where they would perhaps surrender some back or whatever. So I think there's, you know, there's problems with that. You know, I do, and I wasn't saying you were saying it was okay. I just wanted to clarify from my own position about the killing innocent people thing. So yeah, I don't want to get stuck on word games. I know you weren't obviously justifying that, but just sort of, and we both agree that in the scenario that you gave, the criminal, and I'll tell you what, I'll give up that 1% because I can't give you a strong argument why there's really any blame from me other than the fact that I've still, I don't know, I'd still, you know, but whether that's a rights thing or whether that's just an emotion-based thing where I still almost would want to give myself a percentage of blame for killing an innocent person, even if I was duressed to the point of my life being in imminent danger. But how many of the examples can we really say that Israel can make that imminent danger claim of no other way, we had to do it, we were dead otherwise kind of scenario? I just don't think that bears out with the example. So I know you need to wrap up, so I'll give you the last word on it, Walter. But before you do, I just want to say thank you again to you for doing this and to Noah for moderating it. I really appreciate it, because as you said at the beginning of the debate, the best way to deal with these, rather than ad homs and cancellations and all that nonsense, is to argue and have good faith debate, and that is what we've both come here to do. So I appreciate that.
Okay. I don't see why it's incumbent upon me to show that there's another way to stop this. I don't really understand what other way Israel could employ. I mean, if a rocket is coming from a hospital, you have to stop the rocket launcher. And if it's in a hospital, you got to bomb the hospital. I don't know how else you can stop it. And maybe bring them to the UN and complain at the UN. I mean, that's almost silly. The bulldozing is interesting. Look, Israel is now accused of rape. I don't know if they did it or not, but if they did it, you know what Israel will do to a soldier who raped a Palestinian? They'd have a hearing, and if he was guilty, they'd put him in jail. How does the Palestinian, and now that it's not theoretical, it's not just hypothetical, how does the Palestinians deal with Palestinian Gazans who rape Israeli women? They don't put them in jail. They give them a medal, or they give them a pension, or something like that. Now, look, this bulldozing, look, I concede to you, in quotes, that if I come from Brooklyn or New Orleans, and Noah comes from Russia, and we're both Jewish, and we go to some Palestinian and say, hey, we were there first, get out, that's just silly. Nobody is saying that. On the other hand, there's a contention between two different groups, and you have to give the nod to who was there first. With regard to the bulldozers, the reason that Israel bulldozes houses is because the people who lived there were murderers. They killed Israelis. That's why they bulldoze those houses, and what they're trying to do is discourage this random killing of Jews. So it's an entirely different issue. So I would reject that as it's not that they're just going and bulldozing random houses of Palestinians. It's they're bulldozing houses where the family supported a murderer or a rapist or something like that. Well, let me conclude now. It's been a pleasure. I've been in many debates with people, and some of them have been amiable and constructive, and we learn from each other. And this is one of them. And other debates I've been in were not like that, and I enjoy this much more. I think we maybe see each other's position a little bit more clearly than we started, and hopefully other people will now see this, and we will get that 1/1,000,000th of an inch closer to the truth. So thanks for inviting me, and thanks, Noah, for standing by in case either Matt or I get obstreperous and try to dominate the discussion and not to let the other speak and interrupt. And so we didn't really need you because Matt and I were perfectly amiable, but thanks for being there as the policeman. Thank you. Take care.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
Send me the URL for this after when it's ready.
Yeah, I will do. Yeah, I'll get it uploaded soon. And yeah, I just want to repeat my thanks to you, Walter, for having this debate. And it's always good faith debates. Always approach it that way. And thank you again, Noah, for doing this moderating. I really appreciate it. You came in last minute because I hadn't prepared one prior, so that was a really kind of you to step in and do that. And I really appreciate
no problem.
Thanks again. Take care.
It's fun. All right.
Thank you, Walter. Cheers, Noah. Bye.